3 days after our parents died, my brother changed the locks on the house. I found out the hard way. I stood on the front porch, key in my hand, trying to open the door that had worked my entire life. It wouldn't turn. At first, I thought the lock was broken. Then the door opened from the inside. My brother Mark stood there with his arms crossed. Behind him, I could see my suitcase sitting on the hallway floor. "What's going on?" I asked. His voice was calm. Too calm. "You should take your things," he said. "You can't stay here anymore." For a moment, I honestly thought he was joking. "This is our house," I said. Mark shook his head. "No," he replied. "It was Mom and Dad's house." Then he said the words that made my stomach drop. "And now it's mine." I stared at him, completely stunned. "Our parents haven't even had their will read yet." He shrugged like it didn't matter. "Come on," he said. "We both know how this is going to end." Within an hour, my bags were on the front porch, and the door to the house I grew up in closed right in front of me. But my brother made one huge mistake. He kicked me out before the will reading. And 5 days later, when the lawyer finally opened that envelope, everything he believed about that house fell apart. If you had asked anyone in our family growing up who would eventually take over the house, almost everyone would have given the same answer. My brother, Mark. Not because my parents ever clearly said it, but because Mark behaved like it had already been decided. He was the oldest, and in his mind, that automatically made him the heir to everything. Whenever something broke around the house, Dad called Mark. "Come watch this," he'd say while fixing a pipe or repairing a door. "Someday you'll need to know how to take care of this place." Mark loved those moments. He treated them like private lessons on how to run the house. When relatives visited, he'd walk them through the backyard like a real estate agent. "Dad wants to extend the patio here," he'd explain proudly. "And I'm thinking about turning the garage into a workshop someday." Everyone laughed, assuming it was just playful talk. But Mark never treated it like a joke. Over time, he started acting less like a son living there and more like the future owner. Meanwhile, my role in the family was completely different. Mom often asked me to help decorate the house during holidays or organize family dinners. I helped with the garden, planted flowers with her every spring, and cleaned the kitchen after big gatherings. But when it came to important conversations, money, property, repairs, Mark was always included. I usually wasn't. It didn't bother me much when I was younger. Families fall into patterns. Some people lead, some support, and some stay in the background. I had gotten used to being the quiet one. But Mark's confidence about the house kept growing. By the time we were adults, he spoke about it like it was already his. "Eventually, this place will be mine to manage," he'd say casually. Our parents rarely corrected him. Maybe they thought it was harmless. Maybe they didn't realize how seriously Mark believed it. So when our parents died suddenly in that car accident, Mark didn't just step up to handle arrangements. He stepped up like he had already inherited everything. And the scariest part? For a few days, it almost felt like he had. 3 days after the funeral, the house felt painfully quiet. The relatives had all gone back to their lives, the flowers were starting to wilt, and the only sounds left were the ticking of the kitchen clock and the creak of the old wooden floors. I was sitting in the living room going through a box of old family photos. Pictures of birthdays, vacations, and Christmas mornings. Mom laughing in the kitchen. Dad standing proudly beside the garden he loved so much. For a moment, it felt like they were still there. Then Mark walked into the room. He was carrying something in his hand. My suitcase. He dropped it next to the couch. "You should start packing," he said. I looked up at him, confused. Packing? For what? He crossed his arms like this was already decided. "You can't stay here." The words didn't make sense at first. "What are you talking about?" I asked quietly. Mark sighed, like he was tired of explaining something obvious. "Look, I'm not trying to be rude," he said. "But the house is mine now." "Our parents just died," I replied. "We haven't even read the will yet." He shrugged. "Come on," he said. "We both know how that's going to end." Then he added something that made my chest tighten. Dad always trusted me with the house anyway. Within an hour, my bags were sitting on the front porch. And the door to the only home I had ever known closed behind me. That first night after Mark kicked me out, I barely slept. Not because I didn't have a place to stay, I had managed to crash on a friend's couch across town, but because my mind wouldn't stop replaying everything that had happened. Just a few days earlier, our parents were alive. The house was still full of voices, phone calls, relatives visiting, people bringing food and flowers. Now suddenly, everything was quiet. Too quiet. And somehow, in the middle of all that grief, my own brother had decided I didn't belong in the home we both grew up in. Every night, I kept thinking about the little things. My childhood bedroom. The creaky stair on the second step that Dad always joked about fixing someday. Mom's favorite chair by the window where she used to read in the evenings. Those memories weren't just his. They were mine too. But Mark acted like the house had already become his property the moment our parents passed away. The worst part was seeing what he did next. 2 days after kicking me out, he posted a photo on social media. It was a picture of him standing in the backyard with a beer in his hand. The caption said, "Starting a new chapter." I stared at that post for a long time. A new chapter. Like our parents' home was already his victory. Like the rest of us were just side characters in his story. Then, 5 days after the funeral, I got a call from the lawyer handling our parents' estate. "The will reading is scheduled for Friday morning," he said. For the first time since Mark kicked me out, I felt something other than grief. Curiosity. Because if my brother was so confident about the house being his, he must have believed the will would prove it. But in just a few days, we were all going to find out the truth. Friday morning arrived faster than I expected. Mark picked me up to drive to the lawyer's office, and the entire ride felt tense. He didn't say much, but the way he tapped his fingers on the steering wheel told me everything. He wasn't nervous. He was confident. Almost excited. Like he was about to receive something he had already claimed in his mind. When we arrived, a few relatives were already seated in the waiting area. My aunt, my uncle, and 2 family friends who had known my parents for years. Everyone looked tired. Grief had a way of draining the energy out of a room. But Mark walked in like this was just another business meeting. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, greeted us and led everyone into a conference room. A long wooden table sat in the center, and a single sealed envelope rested in front of his chair. That envelope suddenly felt very important. We all took our seats. Mark leaned back confidently, arms crossed. I sat quietly, trying not to think about the last few days, about the porch, about my suitcase sitting outside the house. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat and opened the envelope. "This document contains the final wishes of your parents regarding their estate," he said calmly. He began reading through smaller details first. Savings accounts. Personal belongings. Family jewelry. Items that were divided fairly between the 2 of us. Mark barely reacted to any of it. He was waiting for one thing. The house. Finally, the lawyer turned to the next page. "And now, regarding the family residence located on Oak Ridge Drive." Mark immediately straightened in his chair. I felt my heart start pounding. "The property will be transferred to." He paused for a brief moment. "Their youngest child." For a second, the room went completely silent. Then Mr. Henderson looked directly at me. "That would be you." A wave of whispers spread around the table. Mark's face drained of color instantly. "That's impossible," he said sharply. But the lawyer calmly slid the signed document across the table. Official. Witnessed. And completely legal. The house my brother had already thrown me out of was mine. For a few seconds, no one in the room said anything. Mark just stared at the document on the table like it was written in a language he couldn't understand. Then he suddenly laughed. A short, sharp laugh. "This has to be a mistake," he said, looking around the room. But the lawyer didn't react. Mr. Henderson calmly adjusted his glasses and tapped the paper in front of him. "It's very clear," he said. "Your parents updated their will 2 years ago." Mark leaned forward aggressively. "No," he insisted. "Dad told me I'd be taking care of the house." The lawyer nodded slightly. "And according to this document, they believed you would help maintain it." Mark frowned. "What does that mean?" Mr. Henderson turned another page. There's also a written note attached to the will explaining their decision. The room went quiet again as he began reading. "To our children. We love you both very much, but we've noticed that our youngest has always been the one who treated this house as a home, not just a property." My chest tightened as the words continued. "We trust them to keep this place open for family and memories. That is why the house will belong to them." Mark's face turned red. "You can't be serious," he snapped. But the lawyer wasn't finished. "There's one more clause regarding the property." That sentence made everyone look up. Mr. Henderson continued reading. Our eldest child is welcome to live in the house if invited by the owner, but the final decision will always belong to the legal owner of the property. The legal owner. Me. The weight of those words filled the entire room. Mark leaned back in his chair slowly, shaking his head. This is unbelievable. But the lawyer calmly folded the document and placed it back on the table. No, he said quietly. This is legally binding. And just like that, the brother who had thrown me out of the house 5 days earlier had absolutely no claim to it at all. The moment we stepped outside the lawyer's office, Mark finally snapped. This is ridiculous, he shouted, throwing his hands in the air. A few relatives walking toward the parking lot slowed down, clearly listening. Mark turned toward me, his face red with anger. You knew about this, didn't you? He accused. I blinked, genuinely confused. Knew about what? The house, he snapped. You knew Mom and Dad were giving it to you. I shook my head. I found out at the same time you did. But Mark wasn't listening. He started pacing across the sidewalk, running his hands through his hair like he was trying to make sense of the situation. This doesn't make any sense, he muttered. Dad told me I'd take care of that house someday. I took a deep breath before answering. Maybe he meant take care of it, I said calmly. Not own it. Mark stopped walking. For the first time since the lawyer read the will, he looked uncertain. Then he said the one thing that showed how quickly things had changed. So, what happens now? The same brother who had thrown my suitcase onto the porch just days earlier was suddenly asking me what would happen next. And for the first time in my life, the decision was actually mine. That evening, I drove back to the house for the first time since Mark kicked me out. The same porch. The same front door. Only this time, I had the keys. Mark stood beside me quietly, not saying a word. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. For a moment, I just looked around at the place where our parents had built so many memories. Then I turned to Mark. You can stay here, I said calmly. His eyes widened in surprise. But this house belongs to the family, I continued. Then I added one final sentence. Not just the person who tried to take it.